Amid the opulence of Phrygia's golden halls, beneath arches gilded in divine sunlight, lies the tragic tale of a king whose brilliance could not save him from his own desire. King Midas, a wise and mighty ruler, was once granted a single wish by Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. He asked for what many might dream of: let everything I touch turn to gold. At first, joy overflowed. Roses shimmered like sunlight. Stones sparkled like treasure. But delight quickly curdled into horror. Every loaf of bread hardened into metal. Every drop of water turned to glittering poison. Even a breath, the most human thing of all, became lifeless under the weight of gold. And so, in his palace of riches, King Midas learned the cruel truth, that the brightest gold can hide the darkest curse. But Midas' tragedy did not end with the curse of gold. Blinded by pride, he dared to claim wisdom beyond all mortals, even to judge a contest between gods. When he sided with Pan, the rustic god of pipes, over the radiant Apollo, god of music and the sun, his arrogance sealed his fate. As punishment, Apollo gave him a new crown, not of gold, but of shame, a pair of long, white-furred donkey ears sprouting from his head. From a throne gilded in glory, Midas fell into humiliation, hiding his cursed ears beneath a silken cloth. It was only then he understood, that pride, no matter how richly dressed, can drag even kings into disgrace. Let us turn the pages of Midas' twin tragedies, the golden gift and the cursed donkey ears, and uncover the timeless lessons they reveal, of unchecked ambition, the forgotten virtue of humility, and the heavy price one pays for defying the gods. King Midas and the wish that turned everything to gold. Long ago, in the flourishing kingdom of Phrygia, ruled a king who deeply admired the god Dionysus, the divine patron of wine and revelry. King Midas, as he was known, lived in a grand palace filled with wealth beyond imagination. But more than riches, he prized his own intellect, believing that no one on earth could make wiser decisions than he. One day, some farmers brought before the king an old man, barely able to stand on his feet. They claimed he had been caught stealing the finest grapes from the royal vineyard. But when Midas looked upon him, he immediately recognized the man. It was Silenus, the beloved foster father and companion of Dionysus himself. Overjoyed, Midas welcomed Silenus with honor and hospitality. He ordered a grand feast, with the finest delicacies and the most fragrant wines his kingdom could offer. For 10 days and nights, Silenus dined and celebrated with the king and his guests. On the 11th day, Midas arranged a grand procession to return Silenus to Dionysus. Knowing the old satyr's fondness for donkeys, the king sent for one specially for him to ride. Behind Silenus, nobles followed on horseback, in carriages, or on foot, singing joyfully as they made their way to the neighboring realm, where the god of wine awaited. And there, glittering in golden splendor, stood Dionysus upon his radiant chariot. Overjoyed at Silenus' return, the god turned to Midas and said, "Because of your kindness and generosity, I will grant you a wish, anything your heart desires. Name it, and it shall be yours." Without hesitation, Midas replied,
"I wish for everything I touch to turn into gold."
Dionysus let out a soft, knowing smile.
"You could have chosen more wisely, but very well, your wish shall be granted."
With a wave of his hand, the god sealed the king's fate, a gift that glittered, yet bore the shadow of a curse. Proud of his cleverness, Midas believed no king would ever be wealthier than he. Along the road home, he couldn't resist testing his divine gift. He snapped a branch from a tree, its stem and leaves shimmered with golden light. He picked up a pebble, and it glittered in his hands as it turned to solid gold. Even a lump of dirt crumbled into precious metal at his touch. Ecstatic, Midas rushed back to his palace. As he grasped the door handle, it gleamed instantly. The curtain he pulled became stiff, replaced by a dazzling golden wall. To celebrate, the king commanded a grand feast. But when he washed his hands, the water turned to liquid gold. He reached for a piece of bread, it hardened into a bar of metal. The roasted meat in his hands glowed like the sun. Panicked, he called for servants to feed him. Yet no matter how delicately they tried, the food turned to gold before reaching his mouth. Even the wine froze into a golden mass upon his lips. Surrounded by treasures he could no longer enjoy, Midas was overcome with terror. Frantic, he saddled his horse and rode in desperation to find Dionysus, only to realize, mid-gallop, that even the reins in his hands had turned to gold. At last, he arrived and fell to his knees.
Great Dionysus, forgive my foolish wish. Please, take it back. Free me from this golden curse.
The god looked upon him with compassion and said,
Go to the river Pactolus, bathe in its waters, and your curse shall be washed away.
Without a moment's hesitation, Midas plunged into the flowing stream, washing away the gift that had become a nightmare. From that day on, the sands of the Pactolus shimmered with gold. And as for Midas, once freed from the torment of endless riches, he never again wished to see gold. No sooner had the king escaped one disaster, than he brought upon himself yet another, all because of his pride and his belief that he was above all others. Once again, Midas would learn that arrogance comes at a price. Join us now, as we unravel the tale of how the king's vanity and self-importance led him into one of the strangest punishments in mythology. The story of King Midas' donkey years. King Midas had a deep fondness for the music of Pan, the wild god of pastures, who played his seven-reed flute crafted from river reeds. With small horns and goat legs, Pan leapt joyfully through forest glades, chasing mountain and river nymphs. Beneath the trees, he played light-hearted tunes that danced on the wind, and Midas adored them more than any music of mortals or gods. As his melodies grew in favor, Pan grew bold. He imagined himself superior to Apollo, god of light and lord of the nine muses, guardians of all the arts. Pan, confident in his gift, challenged Apollo to a music contest, asking Mount Tmolos to judge who played more beautifully. Tmolos agreed. Pan performed first, his rustic music cheerful and wild. From the forest's edge, Midas listened, enchanted by the familiar sound. Then Apollo stepped forward, holding his golden lyre. With graceful fingers, he drew forth a cascade of notes, elegant, delicate, like silver wings drifting through the twilight. Moved to the core, Tmolos declared Apollo the victor. But Midas, furious and defiant, rejected the verdict. He could not believe his ears had betrayed him. In his pride, he stood against the gods themselves, and fate was listening. The king cried out in fury.
This cannot be. Pan sings 100 times better. I prefer his music. And if I like it, then it must be better. Do you think I have no ears?
He demanded, as if daring the gods to question his judgment. Hearing such arrogance, Apollo's eyes narrowed with divine wrath. He stepped toward the king, silent and composed, until, with a swift motion, he reached out and seized Midas by the ears. Before the king could speak again, his ears stretched, twisted, and transformed, growing long and covered in soft, snow-white fur. They no longer belonged to a man, but to a beast. A hush fell. The judgment had been delivered, not in words, but in the form of ears that would forever echo his folly. And then Apollo spoke, his voice cold and resolute.
Now, you have the ears you truly deserve.
Midas reached up and felt his ears, long, soft, and unmistakably those of a donkey. Shame flooded him. How foolish he had been to interfere in the quarrels of the gods. He fled back to his palace, wrapping a large cloth around his head to hide his cursed ears. But as days passed, his hair grew longer, and the cloth could no longer conceal the truth. The ears remained, a silent, mocking reminder of his pride. Unable to hide his secret any longer, King Midas summoned his trusted barber to the palace. Behind closed doors, he slowly removed the cloth from his head. The barber gasped, but before he could speak, the king fixed him with a grave stare and said,
If you tell a single soul what you've seen, it will cost you your life.
If you tell a single soul what you've seen, it will cost you your life. The barber nodded, pale with fear. He swore silence, but some truths are too heavy to carry alone. The barber trembled, tormented by the weight of the secret he had sworn to keep. It gnawed at him day and night, pressing on his chest like a stone. At dawn, unable to bear it any longer, he left the city and walked to a quiet riverbank, far from any soul. There, in the soft earth beside the water, he dug a small hole. Kneeling close, with trembling lips, he whispered into the ground.
King Midas has donkey ears.
Then he covered the hole and walked away, believing the secret was buried forever. Afterward, the barber gently covered the hole with soil, convinced that the secret was buried for eternity. A sense of relief washed over him. He returned to the city and resumed his work, believing the burden had been lifted. But the earth had listened. The roots of nearby reeds absorbed his whisper, and the wind became its messenger. And so, whenever a breeze swept across the riverbank, the reeds would rustle and whisper. King Midas has donkey ears. King Midas has donkey ears. Passers-by heard the whispering reeds and carried the tale back to towns and taverns. Word spread like wildfire. In markets, in palaces, and across the countryside, voices repeated the same mocking chant. King Midas has donkey ears. King Midas has donkey ears. Rich, yes, but foolish beyond measure. A king in name, but a fool in truth. A fool, with ears like a donkey. And thus, the pride of a king became the laughter of a kingdom. The tale of King Midas reveals a timeless truth. Unbridled ambition, though it may promise ultimate power, can swiftly turn to tragedy. When everything he touched turned to gold, Midas learned that true worth lies not in precious metals, but in love, compassion, and the quiet beauty of everyday life. Arrogance and pride can leave one wearing the ears of a donkey, cast out not by others, but by one's own vanity and stubbornness. The lesson here is not only to bow before divine wisdom, but to respect the voices of others, be they gods or mortals. Redemption begins with the courage to face one's faults. Midas dared to step into the river and wash away his golden curse. He bore the burden of his donkey ears as a living reminder to remain humble. When greed climbs to its peak, only humility can return us to ourselves. The value of this myth lies not just in its dazzling events, but in its eternal message. Cherish what you have, stay grounded in humility, and never let ambition lead you astray.